Thanks for staying with us. Now, the National Dialogue on Coalitions is wrapping up its talks today. The gathering has not been without its disagreements, as one would expect. The ANC wants the party with the most votes to lead coalitions, but the Freedom Front Plus and the Good Party disagree. eNCA senior reporter Siphamandla Goge joins us from Cape Town, and he's been sitting in on most of those conversations the last couple of days. Disagreements, I suppose, is something that they're just going to have to agree on, Siphamandla. That is really the gist of these conversations. But what they're talking about is how to get to a point to reduce the impact that those ongoing disagreements have. And one of the people speaking there was the former IEC Commissioner Terry Tselane, who spoke about some of the more practical things that can be done to try and limit all of those kinds of disruptions that we've seen being a cornerstone of these coalitions in some of our major metros.
Agree to disagree, I guess that's what they are talking about in nature. And if you look at the political design in South Africa or anywhere in the world, really, those contradictions will always be there. Political parties will always disagree on certain things simply because they differ when it comes to their political ideology, when it comes to their constituencies and their priorities. But they all have one common interest, and that is political power. They contest the elections to get political power, to be able to form government and be able to execute their policies, commitments or priorities. So they disagree on a number of things, but they agree on one thing, that they may be forced to work together by the electorate. For the sake of our viewers and the context here, what I've been observing is there are two main points of disagreements. One is the proposal by the governing African National Congress that a party that gets the highest number of votes must be able to lead in the formation of any coalition government. They say that is a simple and straightforward approach of it. To say if there are four parties, one party that will get the highest number of votes, not the majority, because remember, in order to form government, you need 50 plus 1 to have that majority. So they are saying if there is no one with the majority, but there is someone with the highest number of votes, that person must lead in forming that coalition government. There is another point which is very contentious here, and many parties are not happy with it, is the introduction of what is known as the threshold. The ANC and the DA, they appear to endorse a 1% threshold in saying in order for you to be able to enter and negotiate, you must have received a certain number of votes that will make you qualify to have a percentage, a threshold that will make you sit on the table. Now, many parties have a challenge with that because they say it will only favor the so-called big three parties, the ANC, DA, probably the EFF or the IFP in this regard. So if you've got 0.something%, you do not make a percentage, you will not qualify to form part of those coalition talks and to form government. They say that one is going to disadvantage and exclude many smaller parties, so they do not want that at all. A number of parties include Good Party, includes UDM, Freedom Front Plus. ATM walked out yesterday on the basis of those two main points, which are the source of disagreements: the issue of the party with the highest number of votes and the introduction of the threshold. So that's what appears to be the main challenge for now, where parties are not finding common ground. Those smaller parties are accusing the ANC and the DA of working towards what is known as the Grand Coalition. They're saying if these two proposals pass, it will simply favor the ANC and the DA. Hence, they are saying they will vigorously oppose it. There are even threats to say if it goes through, they may, contemplate going to court to stop it from continuing. So we expect that on day 2, there will be report backs, in terms of commissions and sessions. And later today, Deputy President Paul Mashatile will close this gathering. But let's take a listen to what those who are dealing with elections are saying in terms of coming up with a framework that will make it difficult for political parties to wake up and call for a motion of no confidence, because they say that is what is the source of instability in some of the hung council. Let's take a listen to Terry Tselane.
Limitation in relation to the motion of no confidence, because one of the things that also creates this instability is the fact that you do not really have a government that operates for a long period and immediately there is intervention of motion of no confidence. And we suggested that there are things that we can learn from the way flow crossing was managed, because flow crossing had a window period. Even though it is there in law, it does not mean that, you know, people could just move from one political party to another at any time. There was a duration, there was a particular period within which flow crossing could happen. But also again, even in terms of the second aspect that we are learning from is the one related to the submission of party lists. That once parties have submitted their lists, there is a particular duration again within which they cannot actually change the party list. You can only change it once a year. So even though we are not necessarily giving a duration within which the motion of no confidence should actually be lodged, we're suggesting that it should actually make it much more difficult for political parties just to wake up in one morning and lodge a motion of no confidence. It could be annually.
I suppose you'll agree with me, Sipha, that when somebody like Terry Tselane speaks, even those hardened political animals in there sit down and they do actually pay attention. And another thing that he would have brought up at the time is that if we cannot trust our political parties to administer themselves in these coalitions, perhaps we need to look at an independent body to do that. What were some of the thoughts shared on that?
He says that will be the best practice. It will save everyone time and, you know, this thing of disagreements. If they really can't agree on anything, have an independent body that will probably, you know, administer and take care of coalition governments that will deal with everything. That independent body will then have permanent people dedicated on ensuring that coalition governments work in South Africa. Yes, there will always be contradictions, but at least you will not have political parties screaming at each other, fighting with each other. There will be an independent body that will advise and execute the implementation of that whole process. That will help everyone and also cut this time and period of non-stop and never-ending negotiations with any outcome that, you know, will be produced out of that. So he is of the view that will help a lot in this country. Please take a listen to him.
Independent entity on coalitions, almost like IEC, but in reality it should be an organization almost like CCMA, where once the political parties have agreed to an arrangement, they deposit that agreement to that body, and that body should be the body that then facilitates conversations, deals with voter education, deals with voter education to the extent that coalitions arrangements would actually require, and then any other challenges that actually emerges from them. So you have an entity, that entity is independent, it operates almost like your CCMA, it deals with all coalition arrangements at all levels.
Siphamandla, how did delegates there respond to the use of what they would probably see as a swear word in coalition governments, regulation? Were they open to it?
Strange enough, it appears that they are leaning towards supporting that. You know, I think political parties and politicians will do anything and take anything that will protect their interests. These guys are only worried about one thing only, political power. If that regulation of coalition governments is going to ensure that there is stability and their political power is protected, they would take that. They seem to be favorable to the idea. They are only worried about logistics and, you know, the the nitty-gritties of how it's going to work, but they appear to be persuaded to say, let's have a clearly defined regulatory framework of how to deal with coalition governments in South Africa. It works for them, because if that is successful, at least there will be stability. No one will be worried about waking up today being a mayor, tomorrow you are no longer a mayor, you are removed. So if it will assist them, they will take it. But one political analyst and commentator who is a constitutional law expert, Professor Pierre de Vos, is not really pretty much persuaded about that. He says it does not understand how it would help, because the problem has got nothing to do with law or legislation. It's the politics and political parties themselves. Please take a listen to him.
I'm quite skeptical about regulation of coalitions and whether it will make a difference. Firstly, because the problem is mostly political. It is politicians and political parties and how they behave and what the incentives are that they think they have. Secondly, when you impose regulations in the constitutional field, that regulation will not have the same effect in each situation. In South Africa, the regulation that might work nationally might not work at the local level, or it might work in some municipalities but not others, and it might have unintended consequences.
And that's where we leave it there. Some really interesting insights being put on a platform there in front of some important people. So I think hopefully in that way that this has been a worthwhile exercise. Thank you so much for that update. Siphamandla